Now, as Joey said, and indeed as I said in my introduction to these two conversations, forget the politics for a moment, because there's a great deal riding all of this quite legally. So I'm delighted to welcome back to the programme a good friend of this programme, and there he is, with all of his wonderful books, but no wig on. But that's entirely a matter for him, because he is a QC and is entitled to wear it. It is the great Edward Henry, who is Regulation and Criminal Law Specialist at Mountford Chambers. Can I ask you, first of all, Edward, what is it that the Met are really worried about legally?
I'm not sure, Alastair. It's quite perplexing, because if this is just about a retrospective investigation, which they said they didn't do into COVID regulations, then it's completely inconsistent with what they have done in the past. I mean, where they've said, in respect of this case, we're not interested, not a matter for us, nobody's made a complaint. Oh, you've made a complaint, well, there's no evidence. Oh, let Sue Gray do it. And then Sue Gray's report is just about to be published, and they've decided that they now will investigate it, and then they want to censor it. So I can't quite understand what's going on. People have said, well, they don't want to prejudice their own inquiry. But if it's in respect of magistrates' court proceedings, which we call summary proceedings, then it's almost impossible to get a contempt of court. If it's to do with concoction
Edward,
yeah.
Let me just stop you there briefly for a moment. Crucial point, because you and I both know exactly what that means, because I'm a professional journalist and you're a professional lawyer. The prejudice bit is stuff appearing in the newspaper or on television and radio that a jury might hear and then think, oh, well, he clearly is a wrong one because I read it in the Daily Mail or the Times. And that is irrelevant in this case.
It is irrelevant in this case unless, as a former DPP, Lord MacDonald, said, there is something in the background that we do not know. Such as, for example, was there something more? Now, this is entirely hypothetical. Was there something more than drink there? Drugs, for example. Or was this actually a case of misconduct in public office, which I think is really rather remote because of the Met's historic nonchalance and lack of interest in investigating.
How extraordinary. I hadn't thought of that one. I'll tell you the other thing I read somewhere else and made a note of it because I wanted to ask you about it. And that is, if somebody, and again, nobody's been found guilty yet of anything or charged with anything at all, but if somebody, particularly a staffer, is found guilty of something and is dismissed for whatever they've done, forget what the magistrate does, forget fixed penalty, but is sacked for whatever he or she did. Somebody said to me, well, you know, it's been such a shambles, they may have grounds for judicial review.
Well, they might have grounds for unfair dismissal because obviously the culture is set at the top. And it appears that in the very highest echelons of the Prime Minister's staff, this was being countenanced. I'm leaving aside whether the Prime Minister was aware or had encouraged it. I'm not qualified to speak about that, but from what we already understand, this was countenanced and positively encouraged by, for example, Martin Reynolds.
Yeah. So, final point then. Joey said that politically it had been pretty shambolic. The messaging was all over the place, and that was for that side of it to worry about. As a QC looking at it, from the Prime Minister asking a senior civil servant to make an investigation, the Met reading a first draft. Don't worry, it's happened to me before. I know exactly. I'm glad you did that. Last time it happened to me, I put them on the desk and we just carried on, and it was just fine. And the first draft of the Gray report is then shown to the Met, and the Met then say, hang on a minute, there's stuff in here that might be quite sensitive. Is there a better way whereby this could have been done, which would have been slicker, more efficient and more watertight?
Well, I think if the Met had investigated at the beginning, that, of course, is a counsel of perfection with hindsight. But I think the real problem here is that the purpose of the report was to allay public anger at this apparent hypocrisy that there was one rule for government and one rule for the rest of us. and it was also to enable the legislature, MPs, to hold the government to account. And both of those purposes have now been completely and utterly frustrated, completely, because this report now is going to come out in a diluted, censored form. And the Prime Minister, of course, worked in the media. He knows about the news cycle. And it may be that this has been a godsend for him because it will allow it to be kicked into the long grass. And then people will, as it were, their anger will assuage over time.
We'll talk again when it comes back and when we finally get to read it. But for the time being, thank you very much indeed for that clarity. And what a great pleasure it is. Your son or your grandson?
No, this is my son. But it's an understandable mistake, Alastair.
Yeah. I'm even more impressed with you, Edward. Very best wishes to both of you and have a lovely weekend. Thank you for breaking into it for us here at GB News. Thanks, Edward.
Thank you so much.
Edward Henry, QC, Regulation and Criminal Law Specialist at Mountford Chambers, and very proud dad. What a wonderful thing.